Thank you so much for joining the Asma Jahangi, 5th Asma Jahangi conference. This session is very close to my heart as it basically encompasses the work that AGHS does and the kind of issues that we address and also the kind of institutional response we get on those gender-based issues. So in my opinion, first let me introduce the guests and call them on stage, and then I'll give a brief introduction of the session. First of all, most importantly, I would like to welcome Justice Shahram Sarwar on stage, who is very kind enough to grace this panel. Then our federal ombudsperson, Ms. Fauzia Waqar. I would like to welcome her. She's also the former chairperson for the Punjab Commission on the Status of Women, and now she's the federal ombudsperson on sexual harassment. Then, last but not the least, our friend and also very important guest is Aisha Raza Farooq, who is the chairperson for the Commission on the Rights of the Child. Then we go to our very esteemed online presence, which is, of course, again, like I said, that, the person who represents, in a nutshell, the work we do in Pakistan is Reem Assalam, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls. Thank you, Reem, because this is the 3rd consecutive year you've joined the conference. You are a great friend of AGHS. You've come here in person, and we miss you. We miss the fact that you could not come this year again, but we hope to have you over in the next conferences also. So, Reem, on your keynote, I would like you to address 2 issues. First, you have written extensively about parental alienation, that when children are given custody rights and visiting rights to fathers who have been abusive parent, and women are said to manipulate these visitation rights in their favor, but the trauma that children feel because of this concession that the family courts give. We have similar issues in Pakistan, where we are becoming quite liberal in visitation rights to fathers where there have been abusive situations. Secondly, I would request you to, in your keynote, to address the trans self-ID or self-declared sex. There's growing concern on these laws that are being implemented in countries by some feminists also, that feminists have objected that this will transgress into single-sex spaces and may put in danger and put women's security at risk. So since in Pakistan we have enacted a similar law which gives us the right to self-ID, and although it has been challenged, but I would like you to address and would welcome your views on both these issues.
Thank you very much, Nida, and thank you very much also for inviting me again to the Asma Jahangir conference. And I'm very, very sorry that I wasn't able to be there in person this time. But I also still look forward to today's session and this conversation. First of all, let me say that I think the child custody issue and the instrumentalization of what we call parental alienation is a very good illustration of the topic of your session, which is the legislative constraint and judicial violence that women face. And I will speak to why that is the case. First of all, because the way in which family courts deal with child custody issues today in many countries is an illustration of the inadequacy of how legal systems deal with domestic violence in general, both as a form of violence against women, but also as a form of violence against children. We know that domestic violence is one of the most egregious and pervasive human rights violations that women face. We know it's highly gendered, which means that while men can also fall victims to domestic violence, the facts on the ground show that women are at a much higher risk of the dynamics of abuse and in the family, and that these dynamics are very, very different for them and affect them differently. And we know that most of the victims of intimate partner violence are women. We also know that most women killed are killed by their partners or somebody they know, and that prior to being killed, there is a history of violence that leads to this killing or to this femicide. We also know that most women that are subjected to violence and abuse tend not to report these incidents. And of course, the causes of domestic violence are complex, but at the heart of it is gender inequality and the unequal distribution of power between men and women in society, but also in the family. So when women victims of violence finally muster the courage to report on the domestic violence they are experiencing, they run into another set of challenges that renders them unassisted and unprotected, often with catastrophic consequences in which they will end up further harmed and killed. That is because the allegations of domestic violence they come forward with usually receive insufficient scrutiny by courts. There's often the assumption that, that they are not serious enough, and that also plays, plays out in family courts once the mother and the father of a child has separated. Once they have separated and the mother alleges incidents of domestic violence or abuse against her or the child, courts usually will take the attitude that because they are separated, therefore that violence has stopped, or because they have separated, it doesn't matter so much anymore. It has no implications on the child or on the woman because she is physically not anymore in the same space as the former partner. And then you have the issue that often courts actually disregard the importance of domestic violence altogether when it comes to child custody cases. They consider it simply as irrelevant. The other thing is that child custody issues, including the instrumentalization of parental alienation, illustrate very well how much there is a gender bias in courts in general, but specifically also in family courts. So I have found through this research and through conversations with women organizations and with victims and countless mothers around the globe that there is sort of an inclination to underestimate and to underestimate the extent to which gender stereotyping and patriarchal attitudes influence custody process and therefore result in the failure of justice. So it's not uncommon, therefore, for both law enforcement and justice systems with which mother and child come in contact to have deeply embedded biases. And the gender bias is strengthened by the gender discriminatory laws that exist in some countries, which, as we know, are motivated by cultural, religious, and social factors. And this gender bias colors how judges, police officers, social workers, psychologists, and others tend to hear, understand, perceive, and react to women that come in contact with them, including victims of violence. And therefore, it can result in a massive miscarriage of justice. And these biases can be particularly highlighted when a woman comes from certain racial, ethnic, or religious backgrounds. And for example, if she belongs to a religious minority, or if the woman is a migrant, or, for example, based on her sexual orientation. And what happens, one example of this gender bias is that in custody courts, judges tend to view mothers as inadequate mothers, unable to protect and take care of their children. especially, for example, if they are migrant women, and therefore this perception comes into play. Another gender bias on intersecting ground is, for example, that in some countries educated women are not seen to fit the mainstream image of a domestic violence victim. So if she's successful in her career, if she's highly educated, but she claims that she has undergone abuse or domestic violence, that gets to be disregarded because it doesn't fit with the image that they have of what a successful independent woman is. And these kind of biases are then compounded in the case of child custody issues. And we know, of course, that according to international law, states have an obligation to ensure that gender stereotyping is addressed and dealt with adequately. For example, through the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination. So then how does parental alienation accusations fit into this, and how are they really an example of the persistence of domestic violence and gender bias? Well, we know that in recent decades, there is this concept of parental alienation, also called parental alienation syndrome, that's been widely used by courts when assessing child custody cases, especially when a child expresses fear or avoidance of a parent. So despite the lack of credible scientific support and the fact that the World Health Organization had excluded this from its classification index, it continues to be explicitly referred to by justice systems worldwide. So according to this pseudo-theory that has been disregarded and discounted by the World Health Organizations and others, an alienated and a so-called alienated child would be manipulated by one parent to turn against the other and resist contact with that parent, usually during child custody disputes and in connection to divorce proceedings. So among the symptoms of this alleged syndrome, the child would display relentless denigration of the targeted parent, refuse to have contact with the extended family or the target parent, and insist that they are expressing their own opinions and not those of the alienating parent. Now, while this pseudo-theory is theoretically gender neutral, what we have found is that it's most frequently applied against the mothers, especially when they claim that they have been abused by the father, or when they claim that the father has abused the child. So what happens is that when in courts, a mother comes forward saying, I've been abused by the father of my child, or worse, the child has been abused by the father, or there are sexual abuses happening against the child, the father and his lawyers, or even the justice system, will come back and accuse the mother of alienating the child. And they will then also perceive or represent the mother as less credible than the father, and reframing the allegations as attempts to hinder or block the contact between the father and the child. So we have seen that courts will support the father's also right to having contact with the child, and punish the mother either through loss of custody or imprisonment for this supposed interference. So they will disregard almost immediately allegations of sexual or domestic abuse against the mother or the child, and claim that it is made up and that the mother has invented this in order to alienate the child from the father. Now, what's also concerning in all of this is that the child is rarely asked about what has happened. The voice of the child is rarely factored in. Children are not consulted in a child-friendly manner. And so the children are not listened to during court proceedings, and it becomes a really big issue. So this is with regards to parental alienation, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Now, on the issue of self-ID, if you allow me, Nida, I'll just be very quick on this, and happy to answer also any questions. So I do recognize that according to international human rights law, states do have an obligation to facilitate the legal recognition of gender diverse people, in a way that is consistent with equal protection before the law, privacy, freedom of expression, and freedom from discrimination. However, having said that, there is really no right in international human rights law to self-identification of gender identity. And even UN agencies who claim that there is have not been able to substantiate this argument. And in fact, I would say, and I have said in the past, that this claim that there is a human right to self-ID is also not supported by state practice. Currently, we have around maybe 25 states that have self-ID of gender identity. That's around maybe 15% at most of states. So there is really no international recognition that this self-ID, that the right to self-ID exists. Now, self-ID has also been put forward through a document called the Yogyakarta Principles. This is, however, a declaration made by experts or activists that came together. But again, it's not sprung out of a interstate process. No states have signed up to it, and in fact, one of the members of the Yogyakarta Declaration has also withdrawn from it because he considered that it has insufficiently considered the impact on the rights of women. The way self-ID legislations are being pushed through parliaments in the world have also ignored women organizations' views, have insufficiently consulted with them. And what's the most troubling about self-ID laws, in my view, and in the view of many other human rights experts, is that they have no safeguards built into them, meaning that because they allow any male to self-ID as a woman, that means that it can also allow males that have had a history of violence against women to do so. But also it allows, it prevents safeguarding in the sense that any male is allowed then to enter into any female-only spaces, and that we have seen this being problematic for women in prisons, for female sports, and also for services targeting female victims of violence that are, through these laws, asked to reframe their trauma and to be in spaces with males when they have really suffered horrendous abuse at the hands of males and therefore need female-only spaces. We have also seen how allowing self-ID for children can be very problematic because it can also result in fast-tracking not just social transition of children, but also into then medical transition without adequately taking into consideration whether what is at stake here is really gender dysphoria or whether there are other psychological issues at play. And therefore, it has prevented also a proper inquiry into the well-being of the child to see what is it really that the child needs. Is it gender-affirming care, or is it something else? It also, and I will stop here, the biggest problem with self-ID is that if anyone can be then a woman and anyone can be a man, it also leads to the mischaracterization of the phenomenon of violence against women, which is primarily a situation of male violence against predominantly females. So when now male perpetrators of violence are registered as women, then that leads to really a confusion about what we are talking about, and therefore a confusion about what is needed. So when media refer to somebody as a, who has killed a woman, their wife as a woman killing a woman, that stops being violence against women situation, that stops being a femicide issue. And it can also potentially exonerate then male perpetrators of violence once they have identified as women from, being pursued under the justice system, because in many laws, violence against women or femicide is identified as male violence. So I will stop here, and I'm sorry if I took too much time.
Thank you, Reem. That was very insightful. Interestingly, we've already discussed this before, that Pakistan has no concept of intimate partner violence, and especially, when dealing with the criminal justice system at the police level, it is not even considered an offense, and there is no concept. And yes, you've covered many areas, and the gender inequality is the basis of all the violence that happens against women, and we have a grave situation here. One day we can hope that you can have an official visit to Pakistan and document or present your findings on the state of violence against women. Secondly, thank you for, again, a lot of insight into self-ID, which is a very important issue, and I completely agree that we need to inquire more into it, and it is still in very preliminary stages, and it has to be regulated, treaded upon with a lot of care. And of course, we all appreciate the empathy you bring to your mandate, which I have met you in person, and I've seen that you really do justice to your role as the UN Special Rapporteur. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So next, our most esteemed guest, His Honor Justice Shairam Sarwar Sahib. I'm going to ask you a question, but before I ask you, I want to, I was supposed to ask you a question, but now I would like you to speak on the legislative constraints and judicial violence that women face through our system. Now, I would like to highlight two issues that we often in our line of work we face, so that you can maybe, through your experience, explain that what is the future roadmap for bringing justice to women. Firstly, if you see that in child marriages cases where the law, should be statutory rape, that in under 16 if there is sexual abuse against a girl, but in underage marriages, when this happens, when a girl is under 16, the courts validate the marriage only on the pretext that the law is silent in itself, where marriage has been solemnized, and secondly, most importantly, it is left to the interpretation of the esteemed judiciary to do their own interpretation of Sharia or puberty, let's say. Secondly, if you see, there was a recently very high-profile Iddat case where, in my opinion, I can be wrong, that it was again a case of judicial violence against a woman where the Section 496 was misinterpreted, and it set a very dangerous trend in a country where women do not get their nikah namas and divorces registered, and it gives a license to men to challenge marriages and challenge them under the law and penalize it. So thank you, sir. I'm not asking to address you these two issues, but I'm asking, as your expert input, how can we bring traction, better access to justice for women?
Thank you very much, Nida. It's always an honor for me to say or participate in the conference in the name of Asma Jahangir, because I believe everybody here believes so, and there are many witnesses here that how Asma started working for the bar associations. We remember in 2010, we persuaded her to contest the election, and next year she persuaded me to contest the election. So, as the luck could have it, we both won. And she stood like a rock, needless to say, and she was such a companion. I have no words to explain. Those were the moments which we spent together. I still cherish, and I will cherish throughout my life, because she was something larger than the life, I must say. So, Nida, as you said, I would like to highlight certain points with regard to the judgments passed by the courts of this country, High Court and thereafter Honorable Supreme Court of Pakistan, regarding the rape cases. So I would like to start that women in Pakistan fought a long fight for the protection of their rights under the, of course, stewardship of late Asma Jahangir. She fought a long and hard fight for the repealing of anti-women laws, and we all are thankful to her for her great sacrifices and struggle. There was a colonial legacy, of course, contained in Section 155(4) of the Evidence Act, which read as, when a man is prosecuted for rape or an attempt to ravish it, it may be shown that the prosecutrix was of generally immoral character. Unfortunately, in 1984, Kanun-e-Shahadat order was promulgated. This mischievous provision was copied as such and numbered as Article 151(4) of Kanun-e-Shahadat order. And on Asma's persuasion, the legislature passed the Criminal Laws Amendment Offences Relating to Rape Act 2016 and deleted Article 151(4) of the Kanun-e-Shahadat order, which effectively prohibits adopting a line of questioning on the character of the victim. This was a great enactment and made it difficult to rope women in false case of adultery through an amendment in section 375 Pakistan Penal Code, which this particular enactment inserted section 376A in the Pakistan Penal Code, which placed a bar on the disclosure of the identity of the victim of rape. This particular provision removed a great barrier and operates as a bulwark against victim blaming. Prior to this, there was very less reporting of the offenses because the victim would unfortunately keep silent in order to avoid blaming. There was no distinction between a normal criminal case and a rape case, but the statutory intervention has rightly placed a clog on the disclosure of identity of victim of rape, etc. During the colonial times and even thereafter, a killing or killings undertaken to vindicate family honor were considered good grounds for mitigation of offenses. In this case, reliance can also be placed upon 1968, that is Criminal Law General, and 1977, page 690. But with the advent of the time, this practice was deprecated by the courts, and a fundamental right of women to enter into wedlock, even without consent of wali, was held valid. That was in Saima Wahid's case, a landmark judgment where Asma, of course, appeared. Asma Jagir played a great role in that battle. The legislature finally realized this folly, and through the Criminal Law Amendment Offences in the Name or on Pretext of Honor Act 2016, Section 299EE was inserted, and honor killing was defined, inter alia others, as a fasad fil arz, and a proviso was added in Section 302, through which it has been provided that where the principle of fasad fil arz is attracted, in such cases only, Clause A or Clause B shall apply. Another important provision was inserted through this Honor Killing Act was amendment in Section 310 PPC, which prohibited giving female in marriage for badle sulah. This was great evil. Women folk were treated as property of men. Another provision which corrected the course was a second provision, Section 310 Clause 1, which made compounding in cases of honor killings subject to Section 310, which requires that court has to see that acquittal should be done or not, although legal heirs of deceased have compounded. This caveat was provided a good judicial oversight, as few years ago Supreme Court of Pakistan took suo motu notice and reported as 2013 SCMR page 203 of a rape case, and during the pendency of the proceeding, it was told to the Supreme Court that complainant has entered into compromise. And in another case that was titled as Sadaf Aziz's case, Justice Aisha Malik, then she was judge of the High Court, issued a landmark judgment regarding the admissibility and legality of the two-finger test in case of sexual assault. The court ruled that the two-finger test, which involves the insertion, assesses the laxity, is in violation of the dignity of the victim and right to privacy. And furthermore, the court further highlighted in the same judgment the need for sensitivity and respect towards survivors of sexual assault, emphasizing the importance of trauma-informed approaches to investigation and prosecution. It called for the prohibition of two-finger test and directed law enforcement agencies and medical professionals to refrain from conducting or relying in the cases of sexual assault. In addition to that, Supreme Court of India also passed a judgment. So I would like to refer to the 2021 Supreme Court, a judgment by the Honorable Supreme Court. This is by the three-member bench headed by Justice Mansoor Ali Shah. While speaking for the court, upheld the right of dignity for the victim in the rape case. It's a landmark judgment. Through this law has been settled on the subject of the test already mentioned, an affront to the reputation and honor of the rape survival, and violates Article 4(2)(a) of the Constitution, which mandates that no action determined to the body and reputation of person shall be taken except in accordance with law. Similarly, Article 14 of our Constitution mandates that dignity shall be inviolable. Therefore, reporting sexual history of a rape survivor amounts to discrediting her independence, identity, anonymity, autonomy, and free choice, thereby degrading her human worth and offending her right to dignity guaranteed under Article 14 of the Constitution. While analyzing the legislation, the judgment very eloquently holds, and I quote, it appears that the court has been allowing opinion evidence of the medical experts as to the said test to be brought on record in cases of rape in view of provision of Article 151(4) of Qanun-e-Shahadat order, which was Section 155 of Evidence Act, which provide that when a man is prosecuted for a rape or an attempt to ravish, it may be shown that the victim was of generally immoral character to impeach her credibility. This has now become inadmissible in evidence after the omission of Article 151(4) of Qanun-e-Shahadat order. And earlier, a full bench judgment of Federal Shariat Court has also declared the provision of this article to be ultra vires. So these are general rules, general legal issues which a woman came across in our country, across in the rape cases. So as you said, Nidar, and there was a question regarding the child marriage.
It was an observation that, a lot of, there's a judicial, I would call it judicial violence, when there are judgments that come and undermine the protection and the rights enshrined in our constitution and other subordinate legislation, when the principles of justice are not upheld.
Look, Nidar, there is one thing, that is the approach to the courts. You people are regularly practicing on this side, and whenever, we have a lot more to do for the awareness.
Absolutely.
And we are, we take it, we use the word that sui juris, not the adult. We use the word that, it's a marriage, and nikah is solemnized with the free consent of the families, and nobody asks the girl that, are you, consenting party, and you are not even 18 years of age. You are a minor. So, but still, we have a mechanism. The courts are sitting. We have the provisions in the law. The legislature has done a lot, I must say, regarding to safeguard the interests of the minors vis-a-vis who are getting married without their consent and they're underage. So the awareness is the issue.
Your Honor, thank you so much for
very
highlighting some
much.
very progressive judgments. And although we have a long way to go, and we hope that people like yourself are able to develop the rights that have been envisioned under our legal system. I'm going to go to Fauzia Waqar now. Thank you, Fauzia, for joining us. I know you've just traveled from China and you've only arrived a couple of hours, because we're very grateful that you are able to join us. So you have a very important mandate, and about that I will be asking you two questions. And since we're overrunning the time, I would request both Aisha and Fauzia to two questions each, but restrict the responses to 5 minutes. Okay. Now, so mostly, I'm going to, first question is that there's now much controversial Women's Property Rights Act 2021, and the Islamabad High Court has followed the Lahore High Court's decision by declaring this act as unconstitutional, mainly on two grounds. One on due process, and the other that there cannot be a separate parallel judicial organ running concurrent to the main judiciary. Now, in our landscape in Pakistan, where the right to property is the least realized right, where women can die from prolonged litigation waiting for their inheritance rights or any property matter. For us women, this law was landmark, and we thought that we will cover those grounds that women have been denied for so many years. So the question is that since its enactment, was this, under your mandate, was this law helping women realize their property rights and inheritance rights? And do you think that because we have other parallel systems in this country, there is other executive organs executing judicial powers such as tehsildars, copyrights and taxation tribunals exercising similar powers. So why have they not been struck down, and why this one law which was enacted to help women? Don't you think this is gender discrimination at some point?
Thank you, Nida. Before I move on to answer your question, I just want to say that I want to actually take this opportunity to remember Asma, of course, a mentor and an inspiration. And I was struck by a statement that was displayed, I think it is displayed over here also, that we must speak against injustice even when it is unpopular. The conversations that you brought today must have to be unpopular, you know. I also want to preface my conversation by just bringing everybody back, or rather taking everybody back into the context of what we are talking about, and then talk about the discrimination. I'll try and keep on to time. In Pakistan, while we see excellent representation of women over here, the reality is that women continue to suffer. And that is not my opinion. It is brought about by facts. It is brought about by the numbers. For example, of the 26.2 million children out of school, majority are girls. Less than 13% women have accounts in any kind of a financial institution. Literacy rate of women in Pakistan still stands at about 19%. Just about 4% women own a house. These are the numbers that we are talking about. Similarly, when we talk about representation of women, we must remember, and Justice Shah rightly reminded us, that whether it is in the judiciary or it is in the police or elsewhere in decision-making positions, women are still doing poorly. Just to quote the figures in the police, less than 2% police women constitute the entire police force. Similarly, in judiciary, we are lucky to have about 16% women, but majority of them are in lower positions. So we have a real issue of representation. Hence, affirmative action is needed. Hence, institutions are needed, which will have that perspective. And I also want to remind everyone of Justice Shah's statement of the gender perspective. Yesterday, I was away, but I read that. I'm glad that got a lot of coverage. The perspective is needed to ensure that the constitutional guarantee to equality is upheld. And I am happy to report that it is not just the Supreme Court, but there have been multiple recent judgments from the Lahore High Court, from the Peshawar High Court, which have upheld the right to equality and linked it with multiple other rights. For example, the right to equal age in marriage has been linked to Article 25 of the Constitution. I feel we need to remember this is something that we have promised to do and that we need to uphold. The Property Right, and now to the Property Rights Act. The Property Rights Act of women in Islamabad Capital Territory was enacted in 2020. Why was it needed? It was needed because women do not have access to resources to claim their rights and to run after civil courts or in the civil courts for decades. All of us have had some case where, you know, it has taken not just years but decades to get our property rights. They do not feel confident to reach the courts because the environment of the courts is fairly intimidating to say the least. Similarly, they do not have the requisite knowledge. So they require a gender sensitive institution. And just a clarification quickly that even though the the Islamabad High Court held many of the provisions of this law ultra vires, it was stayed in the intra-court appeal immediately, I think the very next day. So we continue to have that law. All hope is not lost, right? So, so why was it needed? Women, with your permission, I'd like to go bilingual over here, right? Is it all right? Acha. So हमारे पास बहुत सारी, as the ombudsperson, I have 2 mandates in Islamabad Capital Territory and federal mandate. एक तो harassment के साथ deal करने का, which is at the workplace, and it is not just sexual harassment, it can be gender-based discrimination as the law was amended in 2022. The other mandate, and a very important mandate, was conferred on the organization in 2020 through the act that we've just talked about. हमारे पास जो ख़वातीन आती हैं, I am impressed, many of them come from completely rural backgrounds. Whenever they find out that here is a sensitive institution, they approach us. Whenever they find out that things take faster, they approach us, you know. They are emboldened, they are encouraged to claim their rights. A lawyer is not needed in this particular institution. So you can come without your lawyer. We have we have experts over there who will deal with the matter. Again, a clarification. Title is clear. Agar inheritance hai, it can be inherited property, it can be created property, it can be movable, immovable, उसमें कोई कदगन नहीं है. मगर अगर title clear है, and we do not have to decide that, तो फिर उसकी जो है, first of all, succession को expedite करवाना, partition करवाना, with the support of the administration, and even possession, we do that. The government has given us that support. We do that with the help of the administration. And in many cases, Nida, I'm again very eager to share कि 3 महीने में, 6 महीने में, लॉ में 90 दिन का कहते हैं, ऑफ कोर्स थोड़े प्रॉब्लम लॉ में भी हैं, जिसकी वजह से 90 दिन के अंदर या 180 दिन के अंदर फैसले हो जाते हैं. एंड द बेस्ट पार्ट इज़ that people resolve the issues themselves. It is not an adversarial system. It is, we try to reconcile. And I can safely say that today, over 50% of the cases, when families come together, when they realize that right to inheritance is an inherent and fundamental right, and that it will be ensured by a state institution, they immediately settle and they're able to give that right. So therefore, I feel like, and then in the environment, especially headed by a woman, that just gives added comfort to women. I feel that that's very, very important then to have such institutions. You had just one question, and Ji.
So that how you've said that how you're implementing
Right.
it, and you said that it is, lot of issues are being resolved through mediation. And
Right.
yes, and which Justice Sayyid Mansoor Ali Shah also highlighted that how important is mediation in other countries. 90% of the cases are done through mediation, and we need to follow that model, and you've also mentioned that. But my other question was just that, isn't it discrimination to strike particularly this law down when other similar systems are in?
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think it's a matter of perspective again. When any law helps the state realize or effectuate its duty towards all its citizens, it should be welcomed, it should be supported, it should not be struck down. It helps us overcome that gender-based discrimination which has resulted in the figures, in the abysmal figures that I've just shared with you, coming from our national data sets. These are not NGO data, this is not my opinion.
So that's another example of judicial violence. Okay, so now coming to Aisha Raza Farooq, she wears 2 hats. So I'm going to first ask her a question which comes under her mandate as the chairperson on the anti-rape committee, which fortunately I'm also a part of. So Aisha, this is the first time, and I would like to acknowledge this and say that, you know, normally when one government brings a legislation or some good initiative, the succeeding government runs it dry, because they feel that this will not, help, this will help the popularity of the previous party. But however, since you've come as the chair, you have made more progress than the government that actually enacted this law. You have notified special courts, you have notified special prosecutors, and you have brought gender responsive initiatives in this. And not only that, you have made SIOUs, anti-rape crisis cells, and you've done so much, and which is, in my experience, is the first time that an effort at that a law has been so, there's been so much effort to implement a law which was passed by a preceding government. However, despite this effort, we work in this, we do a lot of rape trials, and we've done lots of trainings of the criminal justice system. My question is that despite all this effort, how come the conviction rate remains dismally low, which is 2.5% according to our estimate? Why are the trials, the law says that a trial should conclude in 4 months, but yet the trials are taking about 15 months to conclude. And also, most importantly, the gender-sensitive safeguards are not being put up despite all your efforts. So what is the reason that the legislative intent is not translating in letter and spirit?
Thank you, Nida, for giving me the opportunity. And I think I'd like to start also by remembering the great Asma Jahangir. And it's an honor to be here today, to be a part of a legacy, so to say, as a participant in today's conference. And to talk about, as Asma said, the voiceless, give voice to the voiceless, which are really our children, our women, our young girls here. As you've correctly said, the Anti-Rape Act 2021 is a great example of how different political parties and government have come together to take one law forward. And the special committee that I head, and which you are a member of, as are many other experts, so it's really teamwork. We have notified across the country special courts, special prosecutors, set up anti-rape crisis cells, notified in a brief period of time 4 sets of rules: investigation rules, trial rules, anti-rape crisis cell rules, as well as most recently the National Sex Offender Register rules also have been notified. So you are right. There is much more needs to be done. While conviction rates in gender-based violence and rape crimes around the world are low, in Pakistan they are dismally low, especially low, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done. However, when I say this, we also need to recognize that the Anti-Rape Act 2021 is a very nascent law here. It is designed to be victim-centric, to have gender-responsive structures, which we have tried to provide here through the anti-rape crisis cells, which, as you know, provides under one roof the opportunity to victims and survivors for medical legal services, legal aid, independent support persons. The idea really is to encourage our victims and survivors to come forward and report the crime. And we have also seen an increase in rape crimes around the country. And while on the one hand it depicts, of course, an increase in the crime or offense itself, which I think is still underreported, on the other, I think it also shows the level of trust that is increased in our criminal justice actors, in our police, investigation, and our prosecution services over here. So I think it is an evolving law, and we have to wait and see how what fruit it is going to hold in the future. But I think policy and legislation is the first step over here. To make laws effective, to put them to best use, it is important that we make a paradigm shift in our attitudes, mindsets, and behavior also. And that is where I speak to each and every one of you present in the hall today and those who are listening in. We have to give confidence to our women, our girls, to come out and report the crime. Our police officers, if anyone's here, our judiciary over here, we have to wear a different lens when we're looking at survivors and victims of rape crimes over here. So while you have a fantastic special law in the form of Anti-Rape Act 2021, which talks about confidentiality, which talks about victim support, which talks about doing away with the two-finger test that Honorable Justice Shahram Sarwar has just talked about. I think a societal change in our attitudes, in our mindsets and behavior is absolutely critical to make best use of this particular law.
Thank you, Aisha. So, Ms. Anis Haroon, who's a former chairperson for the National Commission on Status of Women, she's not well, she's been online, so I'll give her just 5 minutes now, although she was supposed to join in the beginning of the session. So, Assalamu alaikum, Anis.
Can you hear me?
हाँ जी, बिल्कुल मैं आपको सुन सकती हूँ जी। ये पहली बात तो बहुत शुक्रिया कि डिस्पाइट आपके हेल्थ कंडीशन की वजह से आप ज्वाइन कर रही हैं, और आपको मैंने शुरू में लेना था बिकॉज आई वांटेड यू टू सेट द टोन ऑफ दिस सेशन बाय हाईलाइटिंग कि जब आप चेयर थी तो आपको सबसे ज़्यादा जेंडर इश्यूज़ क्या नज़र आए कि औरतों के साथ कौन सी सबसे ज़्यादा ज़्यादतियाँ होती हैं और किस चीज़ पे हमें सबसे ज़्यादा काम करने की ज़रूरत है। तो आई वांटेड यू टू सेट द टोन फॉर दिस सेशन, बट चले अभी आप बताएं कि यू नो व्हाट आर द इश्यूज़ दैट वुमेन face and need urgent interventions by the state, by the civil society, by everybody who can work for the promotion and protection of gender rights.
मेरा ख्याल है मेरे समझने में और कुछ हमारे बात करने में कॉन्सेप्ट जो है वो बदल गया। आई थॉट कि आपने कहा है कि आप मुझे बाद में लेंगी, यूएन रेपटियर के बाद स्पीकर जो है उसके बाद। एनीवे, तो मैं ये कह रही हूँ कि जो हमारा कमीशन था, नेशनल कमीशन ऑन स्टेटस ऑफ वुमेन, तो इस लिहाज से वो एक मेजर चैलेंज था कि जब ये कमीशन बना था तो इट वाज जस्ट बॉडी जो एक अनाउंसमेंट से बन गई थी परवेज मुशर्रफ के, इट वाज अंडर वुमेन डेवलपमेंट। तो आई वांटेड इट टू बी एन इंडिपेंडेंट बॉडी, अ फुल फ्लेज्ड मैंडेटेड। सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल वी पास द लॉ and made that commission independent in 2012 by the Act of 2012. And then आज हम जितने भी लॉज की बात करते हैं उन सब में ठीक है बाद में अमेंडमेंट्स आई, लेकिन इनकी जो सारे बेसिस हुई वो इसी तरह से हुई कि उस वक्त जो है 6 लॉज बने फॉर वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट, बिकॉज यू नो व्हाट वी रियलाइज कि हमारे पास हमने यूएन कन्वेंशंस तो साइन कर लिए हैं, लेकिन उनको डोमेस्टिकेट करने के लिए जिन लॉज की ज़रूरत है वो लॉज नहीं हैं। सबसे बड़ा जो मुझे इशू नज़र आया था ख़वातीन का, विच कट्स अक्रॉस ऑल क्लास बैरियर्स, वाज वायलेंस अगेंस्ट वुमेन। जो उनकी ज़िंदगियों में इतना वायलेंस था हर तरफ से, ख़ास तौर पे डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस फैमिली की तरफ से, और अब आगे जाके बात करें तो कस्टोडियल वायलेंस भी आ जाता है, लेकिन उसके लिए लॉज जो है वो बहुत ज़रूरी थे। तो डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस के ख़िलाफ़ लॉ बना, हरासमेंट के ख़िलाफ़ लॉ बना, इनहेरिटेंस के लिए के प्रोटेक्शन के लिए लॉ बना, क्योंकि इनहेरिटेंस मिलती नहीं थी ख़वातीन को। और इसके अलावा जो है 6 लॉज जो आज भी हमारी वेबसाइट पे मौजूद हैं वो बने, जिसमें बाद में एंटी रेप लॉ भी है जिसमें अमेंडमेंट्स होती रहीं, क्योंकि लॉज जो हैं उनकी जिस तरह से वो इस्तेमाल होते हैं और फिर उनकी ज़रूरत महसूस होती है तो उनमें चेंजेस और अमेंडमेंट्स जो हैं वो आते रहते हैं। अब हमने क्या किया, हमने ये किया कि हमें ये अंदाज़ा हुआ कि ख़ुद ख़वातीन में बहुत से इन जो उनके पास लॉज हैं या उनके पास जो भी चीज़ें मौजूद हैं, हक मौजूद हैं, उसकी अवेयरनेस नहीं है। वो समझती हैं एक पेट्रियार्कल सोसाइटी है, इसमें अगर हमें मार भी पड़ती है, इसमें हमारी रेस्ट्रिक्शन भी है आने जाने पे, हमारी एक्सेस भी एजुकेशन की कंप्लीट नहीं है, बस इतना पढ़ लिया काफ़ी है, एम्प्लॉयमेंट की ज़रूरत क्या है वगैरह वगैरह। तो ये चीज़ें शायद उनकी ज़िंदगी का हिस्सा हैं। तो हमने सोचा पहले उन्हें ये बताया जाए, और हम हर जगह गए और हमने सेशंस किए, हमने मुख्तलिफ़ कम्युनिटीज़ से ख़वातीन को बुलाया, हम गिलगित बल्तिस्तान तक गए, हमने वहाँ कम्युनिटीज़ को बुलाया, उनको बताया डिफरेंट रीजन्स में कि ऐसा नहीं है, आपके पास वो कवानीन भी मौजूद हैं, आपका कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन भी इक्वल राइट्स गारंटी करता है, आपका एक्सेस भी है टू एजुकेशन, आप आपका एक्सेस भी है टू डेवलपमेंट, आर्टिकल 25, 26, 27 ये सब मौजूद हैं, और हम जो है सीडो हमारे पास मौजूद है, और हम इन सब की मदद से जो है अपना वो हक हासिल कर सकते हैं। तो इससे मेरा ख्याल है कि एक बहुत फ़ायदा होता है जब आपके पास कवानीन मौजूद होते हैं जिनके ज़रिए आप उनको अपनी जदोजहद को लीगलाइज कर सकते हैं, स्टेट को चैलेंज कर सकते हैं। तो ये बेसिस जो है वो हमने प्रोवाइड की, और फॉर एग्ज़ाम्पल हमने लोगों के केसेस उठाए, हालांकि उससे पहले इंडिविजुअल केसेस नहीं उठाए जाते थे, लेकिन ख़ास तौर पे जो बहुत हाईलाइट हुए डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस के केसेस, हमने वो केसेस उठाए, उनकी हेल्प की पूरी तरह से, उनको फिर हम लाइमलाइट में लेके आए कि किस तरह से इस खातून का ये मसला था और वो घर बैठ गई थी परेशान होके, लेकिन थोड़ी सी हेल्प से, थोड़ी अवेयरनेस से किस तरह उसने अपना हक जो है वो हासिल किया है। तो मैं समझती हूँ कि जो वुमेन्स राइट्स का इशू है ये एक कांस्टेंट स्ट्रगल है, और हम ये देखते हैं अभी यही बात हो रही थी ना कि इम्प्लीमेंटेशन रेट जो है वो बहुत कम है, देयर इज नो डाउट अबाउट इट। अभी बहुत सारे ऐसे केसेस होते हैं जहां हम देखते हैं कि जो परपेट्रेटर्स होते हैं दे गो स्कॉट फ्री, बट इट डजंट मीन दैट वी शुड नॉट ब्रिंग देम इन द आईज ऑफ लॉ। हमें कोशिश तो करनी चाहिए, अगर आज कम है तो कल ज़्यादा होंगे, परसों उससे ज़्यादा होंगे। तो एज एन एक्टिविस्ट आई एम वेरी होपफुल कि हमारा हर स्टेप जो है वो ठीक है, कुछ पीछे भी ले जाने की कोशिश होती है, कुछ इस तरह की भी लॉबीज मौजूद होती हैं जो हर चीज़ को इंटरप्रेट करती हैं गलत अपने तौर पे रिलीजन के हवाले से, और ये कहती हैं कि औरत को तो घर में रहना चाहिए और ये हक नहीं है और वो हक नहीं है। लेकिन अब ज़माना बहुत बदल गया है, जब तक औरतें ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा औरतें बाहर निकल के काम करने पे मजबूर हैं, और जब औरतें काम करती हैं और फाइनेंशियली स्ट्रांग होती हैं तो उनमें इतनी हिम्मत और इतनी सलाहियत आ जाती है कि वो अपने हक के लिए लड़ सके। और ये हमने देखा है कि जहाँ औरतें जो हैं वो फाइनेंशियली स्ट्रांग हैं, उन्होंने अपना हक हासिल किया है, उसके लिए उन्होंने मेहनत की है, जद्दोजहद की है, और सोसाइटी भी फिर सोसाइटी की सपोर्ट भी बहुत ज़रूरी होती है। देखिए अब अगर इस तरह की थिंकिंग होगी कि ख़वातीन को घर में बैठना चाहिए, इन्हें क्या ज़रूरत है करने की, लड़का है उसको पढ़ा लो, लड़की को आगे पढ़ाने की क्या ज़रूरत है, तो खुद जो लोग हैं सोसाइटी में उन्हें ये सोचना चाहिए कि अगर औरत एम्पावर होती है तो सिर्फ औरत का फ़ायदा नहीं है, बल्कि उनके अपनी फैमिलीज़ का भी है, उनकी अपनी कम्युनिटीज़ का भी है, और इवेंचुअली सारी कौम का फ़ायदा है। जब हम when we talk about women, we talk about 50% of the population, almost 50% of the population. तो हम 50% पॉपुलेशन को एम्पावर किए बगैर, उनको उनके राइट्स दिए बगैर आगे नहीं जा सकते। तो ये बात तो तय है कि अगर हमारे मुल्क को तरक्की करना है और आगे जाना है तो जितनी ख़वातीन हैं हमें उनके हक़ को तस्लीम करना पड़ेगा, इम्प्लीमेंटेशन के तरीक़े जो है वो मजबूत बनाने होंगे, और वो अब बन रहे हैं जिस तरह वक्त के साथ साथ, और ये बेहतरी की तरफ ही जाएगी सोसाइटी। हमें हमारे लिए वापस जाना जो है वो मुश्किल है, इसलिए कि अगर जब ज़्यादा औरतें जो हैं वो अपने घरों की कफ़ील हैं, देखभाल कर रही हैं, काम कर रही हैं, अपने पैरों पे खड़ी हुई हैं, खुद मुख्तारी हासिल करती जा रही हैं, तो उन्हें धक्का दे के पीछे करना मुश्किल है। बजाय इसके उस, और इसलिए मैं समझती हूँ कि एज एन एक्टिविस्ट आई स्टिल हैव होप्स कि जो आसमा का एक विजन था, हम उस विजन को लेके आगे बढ़ रहे हैं, और जो हमारी यंगर जनरेशन है दे आर फॉलोइंग द फुटस्टेप्स ऑफ आसमा जहांगीर, एंड वेरी if not now we have come a long way, but we still have a long way.
Thank you so much ji, thank you.
क्योंकि सोसाइटी के
Thank you जी, thank you Nis Sahiba, thank you so much for
सोसाइटी के
joining us.
प्रोग्रेस के साथ औरत की भी।
Thank you
Thank
जी.
you, thank you for asking me to speak.
Thank you Nis Sahiba.
Thank you.
Absolutely, I completely agree
Thank
that laws are very important, and considering that all 4 provinces have enacted a law on, against domestic violence, Yet in the Islamabad capital territory अभी तक domestic violence का law नहीं बना है. और when it was floored, it was tabled in the National Assembly, तो हमारे Interior Minister ने कहा था कि ये चादर और चार दीवारी का मामला है. And then one of the ministers said that it should be referred to the Council of Islamic Ideology. वो नहीं refer हुआ वहाँ पे, लेकिन एक सोच कि why does abusing or using violence against another person requires the sanction of a religion. जहाँ तक हमें सारे religions की समझ है, I don't think any religion condones violence against anybody, forget women. So कि उसके ऐसी जब औरतों के ख़िलाफ़ तशद्दुद की बात आती है तो आप कहते हैं कि काउंसिल ऑफ इस्लामिक आइडियोलॉजी पे चले जाएं, ये हमारी चादर और चार दीवारी का आपकी इज़्ज़त ख़राब होती है कि औरतों को अगर आप प्रोटेक्शन दे दें अगेंस्ट वायलेंस. तो बिल्कुल कानून बनाना बहुत ज़रूरी है और हम होप करते हैं कि इस्लामाबाद में भी डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस के ख़िलाफ़ आ जाएगा. और हमें ऑल्सो वी नीड टू ऑनर आर इंटरनेशनल ऑब्लिगेशंस. नाउ वी गॉट 10 minutes left, so last 5 minutes to Fawzia and last 5 minutes to Aisha. Quick questions to you, Ji, Fawzia. So there were amendments in the sexual harassment law in 2022, which expanded the definition of harassment and to include gender discrimination and also recognize harassment which is not necessarily sexual in nature. Then we have a judgment by Justice Mushir Alam which limited the scope of harassment to only sexual acts. But then after the amendments we have a judgment of Justice Aisha Malik which set the parameters for a reasonable woman standard. Now I want to ask you that since you've gotten this mandate, how are you implementing this newly amended, expanded version of definition? Are you able to, and what kind of cases are you getting?
Okay. थोड़ा सा quick comment on your previous observation कि वो Islamabad has not made the Domestic Violence Act. मैं तो कहूँगी जो बाकी सूबों ने कर लिया उन्होंने क्या कर लिया है जो उन कवानीन के साथ जो अब हमें इस्लामाबाद में चाहिए. Because I know of not even 10 cases from collectively from all the provinces where a victim of domestic violence has gotten justice. It can be for various reasons. It can be not just because issues with the court system, but also because of the fact that there isn't the infrastructure needed to protect a woman in order to see her through that ordeal, so that she should report these incidents and not be under the constant threat of divorce and being made homeless. So all of that. But आपका जो सवाल था about harassment की definition expand होना, यहाँ पे भी देखें women's representation कितनी काम आई है. A woman's perspective was needed to expand the scope of the law, because law जो है वो expand होता है through its application and through the judgments that we get. तो वहाँ पे जस्टिस आयशा मलिक जो हैं उन्होंने कहा कि इसकी जो simple reading है कि sexual violence is only, or sexual harassment only falls within the ambit of the definition of harassment is incorrect, because it is sex based. Sex based का मतलब है gender based also, you know, in simple language. और ये कानून आने के बाद अभी अगर आप मेरे से पूछें कि कितना तब्दीली आई है हमारे प्रोसेसेस में, तो आई विल से दैट इट इज़ नॉट ड्रास्टिक, बिकॉज लोगों को अभी भी समझने में थोड़ा सा टाइम लग रहा है कि जेंडर बेस्ड डिस्क्रिमिनेशन क्या होती है, बिकॉज इट इज़ द ऑर्डर ऑफ द डे. इट इज़ नॉर्मलाइज सो मच दैट वी टेक इट एज granted and accepted. So gender based discrimination, anything which disadvantages one gender by virtue of their identity is gender based discrimination. अभी आपको जो सारे मैंने आदाद व शुमार ख़वातीन के बताए हैं, अगर वो इतने नॉर्मलाइज्ड हैं तो औरतें कहाँ आके रिपोर्ट करेंगी कि मेरी प्रमोशन नहीं हो रही. रिसेंट एक रिपोर्ट थी वुमेन इन लॉ की, आई थिंक, जिसमें कहा है कि ख़वातीन की पोस्टिंग्स जो हैं वो इतनी फेवरेबल नहीं होती उनकी. इवन द वुमेन इन जुडिशरी एंड अदर लॉ एनफोर्समेंट एजेंसीज, ट्रेनिंग अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ आर लेस. Their promotions, as you know, according to the numbers, are lesser than men. तो अब कितनी ख़वातीन लेके आएंगी अपनी discrimination की कहानी. But the law is an extremely important starting point, because that helps you set precedent. That becomes that goalpost that other people are going to follow. And yes, we are currently in the process of trying to understand how to make sure that that systemic discrimination is dealt with under the law. The law is still evolving. We have numerous challenges for the application and implementation of the law, and one of them being, and let me address the members of the bar over here, the constant adjournments that we get. Because of the fact that the senior वकील का आना ज़रूरी है और वो हमेशा proxy counsels भेज देते हैं और proxy counsels think that they can't even speak, वो आके कहते हैं जी वो senior वकील नहीं है तो जिसकी वजह से नहीं, and it goes on for months upon months. The second problem that in implementing that law of harassment is कि इंटरलॉक्यूटरी ऑर्डर्स पे भी हर चीज़ रिप्रेजेंटेशन में चली जाती है प्रेसिडेंट साहब के पास. मतलब एक माइनर सा ऑर्डर है प्रोसेस के ऊपर, उस पे रिप्रेजेंटेशन में आपने एक्चुअली द प्रेसिडेंट साहब हैज़ 5 ombudsmen टू डील विद, तो वहाँ पे बहुत सारे लंबे डिलेज होते हैं. Then of course there are other issues. So yes, great starting point, very, very useful to address systemic discrimination. Results, we are still awaiting results. Thank you.
Thank you, Fawzia. Like Anis also said, that making a law is a starting point, and we can hope one day it will be implemented. So it is a positive thing कि कानून बने. इंशाल्लाह उम्मीद कर सकते हैं कि एक ना दिन होगा. Aisha, coming back to you, a subject which is very close to your heart about the violence against domestic workers, underage domestic workers, and there was a Rizwana case which I've heard you speak often about it very passionately, and अभी सिंध में एक recently case था जिसमें वो बच्ची के साथ बहुत videos निकली थी, और unfortunately what we notice is that whilst these children come from very marginalized families, the perpetrators are from extremely influential positions. And what we notice is that once the public outrage has died in these cases, there is no justice done. People are let out on bail. So my question to you is that whilst this Domestic Workers Act in Islamabad and in Punjab and Sindh exists, why is it not being implemented? What is the status and what is the reason that justice is not being given? And do you think that somewhere that the parents who send their very small children to work should be penalized for sending their children, because accountability has to happen, and where does it start and how do we cure this issue?
Thank you, Nida. The case of Rizwana, who's a child maid who was hired against the law in the house, unfortunately, of a sitting civil judges, and his wife allegedly was responsible for beating her up. और मैं personally रिजवाना को देखने गई लाहौर के एक हस्पताल में, and I couldn't imagine how one human could beat another, leave alone a child, that badly. Her bones were broken, her skull was cracked, she had bruises on her face, and she's still undergoing treatment. She's in and out of hospitals all the time. And that is when, as chairperson of the National Commission on the Rights of Child, we took upon ourselves to look at what laws exist in the country on children in domestic work. And the laws are hugely fragmented. And while you refer to these laws, the ages under these laws in ICT are different from Punjab. And the weakest link obviously always is our implementation in our country. So we have drafted a law that completely bans children in domestic work as per international conventions which Pakistan has ratified also, and also looking at our own grassroots realities, because children who work in domestic settings are a hidden phenomenon. They're working within closed doors. They usually reside with their employers. They're called to work at any time of the day. They're rarely sent for vacation. And generally, as Rizwana was also locked up inside the house when the family conveniently took off for a family vacation. So we have undertaken provincial consultations. चारों सूबों में हमने experts से बात की है, and we have sent a draft law to the Ministry of Human Rights, a law that criminalizes children in domestic work, makes the offense non-bailable and non-compoundable, so that the powerful and well-connected, like the alleged perpetrators in Rizwana's case, cannot escape justice. They cannot be out on bail, and they cannot go for out-of-court settlements, जो कि usually एक weaker party के साथ आप देखते हैं हमेशा ऐसे cases में जहाँ के बच्चों के साथ या ज़्यादती होती है. आपने तो चाइल्ड डोमेस्टिक वर्क की बात की. अभी हाल ही में रमज़ान के महीने में हमें केसेस मिले हैं चाइल्ड सेक्सुअल अब्यूज़, जहाँ पे मुअल्लिम ने कंप्लेंट की एंड दैट कंप्लेंट वाज विड्रॉन because of peer pressure. Instead of the community coming together and pressurizing and standing beside such families कि नहीं अब कंप्लेंट रखे, हम आपके साथ खड़े हैं, आप नेगेटिव प्रेशर देखते हैं कि वो कंप्लेंट वापस ले ली जाती है. And that is where all of us need to play our part to ensure that no abuse against our children is tolerated anymore. 40% of our population is below 18 years of age. And thus I think, I hope the government will take this law very seriously. It requires an amendment in the Pakistan Penal Code ताकि एक ही दफ़ा पूरे मुल्क में हम ये कानून साजी कर सकें. Otherwise, you know, under the devolved federal system that we have, it is very, very difficult. बच्चों की शादी की उम्र different है किसी सूबे में दूसरे सूबे के मुकाबले में. बच्चे की age itself is different, different कानून में. So as chairperson of the National Commission on the Rights of Child, we are working and advising governments, using our force to push governments to make the legislative changes and reforms that are absolutely needed. But there, all of you need to come forward to raise your voice, as Asma Jahangir would have said today, to become the voice of the voiceless. वो बच्चे, छोटे बच्चे जिनका दिन दिहाड़े ज़्यादती होती है घरों के अंदर, मसाजिद में, स्कूलों के अंदर, उनकी आवाज़ बने. And I call upon our judiciary here, our police, if they're sitting here or listening in to today's session, that you must prioritize child rights. ये बच्चे कल को पाकिस्तान का मुस्तकबिल हैं. अगर हम आज इनमें इन्वेस्ट नहीं करेंगे, इनको एक अच्छा अपब्रिंगिंग, अच्छा मुस्तकबिल नहीं देंगे, then you can just foresee for yourself where Pakistan will be another 10-20 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Absolutely, इसमें कोई दो राय नहीं है. इसमें कोई दो राय नहीं है कि हमें ऐसे मजबूत कानून बनाने चाहिए फॉर द प्रोटेक्शन ऑफ चिल्ड्रन. और ये भी बिल्कुल सही है कि अ चाइल्ड इन पाकिस्तान इज़ डिफाइंड बाय डिफरेंट एजेस अंडर डिफरेंट लॉज. सो इससे सबसे पहले हमें ये ठीक करने की ज़रूरत है. थैंक यू सो मच जी. मैं आपका बहुत शुक्रिया अदा करती हूँ. ऑडियंस ने भी बहुत पेशेंटली सुना, लेकिन मेरा बड़ा स्टार पैनल है जी. AGHS जो काम करता है उसके हिसाब से बहुत स्टार पैनल है. सबसे पहले तो हमारे His Honor Justice Shahram Sarwar, जो कि आसमा के दोस्त भी थे और बड़े जेंडर रिस्पॉन्सिव जस्टिस देते हैं. फिर ऑफ कोर्स फौजिया वक़ार needs no further introduction, Aisha Raza, and then the UN rapporteur, and also thank you to Anis Haroon, who was the former chair on the status of women. Thank you so much, ji, and I think we've already overrun our time.